What's up, brothers and sisters? This is Xavier Best with the Exact Facts. On this week, we'll be talking about Kamala Harris, her run for president in 2020, how she fits into the current policies, and lastly, should we vote for her or not? I think when examining any politician, it's important to have a historical understanding. And I think the perfect starting point for a historical understanding of Kamala Harris is at the tail end of the Civil Rights Movement. This was after the passage of the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act. Things appeared to be on the up and up, but that wasn't the case. What we had was what Dr. King called a Whitelash, which was basically a counter-revolution by the forces of the right wing to undo all the victories of the Civil Rights Movement. The main manifestation of this Whitelash was embodied in what was called the Get Tough in the War on Drugs movement. At the head of this movement was a one Richard Nixon, who carefully and calculatedly made a link between civil rights activism and black militancy and criminality. And this came through in his Get Tough on Crime policy and the COINTELPRO movement headed by J. Edgar Hoover, which just systematically dismantled all the black power movements that helped to uplift black people around the country. Later on, we had this morph into Reaganism, and under Reagan, we saw the biggest prison boom in American history, where he had disproportionate sentences for people who possessed crack cocaine and lesser sentences for those with powder cocaine. Naturally, this had a racial bias to it, and the prisons became overfull with black and brown bodies. Next, we had Clinton, and Clinton passed the crime bill. Under the crime bill, we had the largest increase of black male incarceration in American history. Even though he was a Democrat, Clinton didn't depart from the Reaganism and the Nixon policies that preceded him. Out of those three, we have Kamala Harris. And Kamala Harris represents the hybrid of Nixonian tough on crime policies, Reaganism, war on drugs, and Clinton crime bill. That's how we get Kamala Harris. How has Kamala Harris fared in light of these three presidents? Well, I would argue she hasn't fared well. Consistently, if you look at her record, she has been a career prosecutor. And what is a prosecutor? Well, a prosecutor is a person who's tasked with bringing charges against a defendant in a court of law. That sounds innocent, but it's really not. Because when you look at what prosecutors do, they overcharge defendants to the point where they're forced into plea bargains. And out of these plea bargains, they often submit to harsh sentencing that are disproportionate with the crimes they committed, or sometimes they're innocent and they go to jail anyway because they don't want to go through the long, arduous process of a trial and then have to spend the rest of their life behind bars. Well, Kamala Harris, if you look at her record, she's been solidly on the side of 3 strikes. She's been solidly on the side of mandatory minimums. She's been solidly on the side of solitary confinement. All of these things, if you look at her record as district attorney and attorney general in California, she's been behind. So when the American Civil Liberties Union criticized Kamala Harris, she was silent. Proposition 66 was a law that aimed to expand the rights of defendants by narrowing those crimes that were counted as felonies. Therefore, people charged with what would normally be a misdemeanor would be treated like they committed a misdemeanor. Kamala Harris didn't endorse that. When Proposition 47 was introduced, which tried to reduce the overpopulation in California prisons by treating felony convictions as misdemeanor convictions, Kamala Harris also was on the wrong side because under her estimation, she felt that those prisoners were needed for cheap labor, slave labor to be honest. When solitary confinement began to psychologically ravage Californian inmates, Kamala Harris only had mild reforms directed at juveniles that would only limit the length of time to reasonable lengths of solitary confinement, which is basically legalese for I can keep you in my torture chamber for however long I want. But we all know that solitary confinement is a form of torture that leads to degenerative brain damage. Nonetheless, Kamala Harris never completely disavowed her support for solitary confinement. Or let's take the fact that California leads the nation in child poverty. If you look at Kamala Harris's website, there isn't a muttering word about child poverty. But she does have data about the LIFT Act and how the LIFT Act would lift, quote, middle-class Americans to a better standard of living. Well, how would it lift middle-class Americans to a better standard of living? Well, basically, she figured that it would be better to give these suffering economic families benefits through the tax code. But what's left out is that the qualifications that must be cleared in order to be eligible for LIFT benefits are so high that the majority of poor Californians don't even clear the test, and therefore they're left out under a policy that was purportedly designed to help them. Add to this a novel idea in the world of criminal justice, criminalizing the parents for the crimes of the kids. Well, I shouldn't say crimes, but Kamala Harris had this idea that if a kid skips school too many times, then it's okay to imprison the parents. Now that just seems sadistic, unusually sadistic. And plus we have a video of her mentioning this policy and laughing. And when she was questioned about it, she says, "Oh, well, I didn't imprison anybody. I was just threatening them with incarceration," as if that's supposed to be a relief. Really, if you look into the details, you find out 2 people were imprisoned under this harsh law. Note that this law is expanding a problem that already exists. We all know there's a school-to-prison pipeline that imposes harsh disciplinarian rules on young black boys to filter them into the criminal justice system. Kamala Harris looked at this and didn't say, let's figure out a way to put an economic kind of infrastructure in place so these kids aren't channeled into the criminal justice system. She said, no, let's expand the school to prison pipeline by not only filtering the kids to prison, but let's filter the mom and dad to prison too, so the whole family can be in prison. That's inconsistent with any kind of progressive prosecutor or really black person that really cares about black people. All these things, I think, together show how Kamala Harris is someone who's heavy on rhetoric, heavy on image, but very thin on substance and policy options. And this is something that we really have to dig into if we want to make informed choices as an electorate. So let's look at, for example, her appearance on The Breakfast Club. This was circulated widely throughout the media as a testament to Kamala Harris's blackness. You know, it came on the back of her dancing and shimmying to Cardi B and listening to Snoop Dogg and Tupac while smoking a joint. This is all supposed to be appealing to black voters because we're supposed to look at that and say, she's just like us. She listens to Tupac, she listens to Snoop Dogg, she rocks with Cardi B. But I'm here to tell you that even if she did rock with Cardi B, even if she did smoke marijuana, what are we to think of a politician who carefully exploits that entertainment value, but in her legal career continues to incarcerate disproportionately black and brown people under those laws? What do we say when we look at her silence when marijuana dispensaries were being raided in California? She said she was smoking marijuana in the 80s. Well, if you were smoking marijuana in the 80s, why are you so harsh on people who smoking marijuana today? Are you genuinely on the side of those who are being criminalized under these harsh war on drug laws? Or are you just using the rhetoric and the image of marijuana culture for political expediency? I think it's the latter. We have to ask ourselves, why does Kamala Harris continually say one thing and do another? Well, it all comes down to perception. So if you look at Pew Research polling, it shows that the public perception of crime is not aligned with the actual incidence of crime. And this has been true since the peak of the crime wave, which was in the early 90s. Since the early 90s, crime has steadily declined. So that's why if you look at Kamala Harris's 2011 inaugural address when she became Attorney General of California, she noted that at the core of her smart on crime policy was the reduction of violent crime. So I looked up, I said, what was the violent crime rate in California in 2011? Well, it was at a historic low. So why would you make it the center of your smart on crime policy when crime is at a historic low? Because the perception of crime is important if you want to get the public to accede to your harsh policies that are victimizing nonviolent people. So these are all elements that Kamala Harris, like her predecessors, like Reagan, like Nixon, like Clinton, has mobilized against the public with the intent of deluding us and getting us to gather around the flag and support her, even though she doesn't have our best interests at heart. And I think it's incumbent on us as American citizens to really deconstruct this and really look into it to see if it's really going to help us. We should look at her in the same way her father looks at her, who recently condemned her for claiming to be a real Jamaican who smokes marijuana. But we all know that's a tired stereotype, and her father pointed that out. So we should follow that path instead of following the path of the Charlemagne the Gods or Michael Eric Dyson or the Roland Martins or whoever else is out there trying to convince us that blackness is sufficient. Your black skin is just a superficial manifestation of blackness. If we want substantive blackness, we need policy. We need policies over playlists. We need policies over incarceration. We need policies over anything that doesn't lead to the betterment of us as a race. This is Xavier Best with the Exact Facts, signing off. Peace. I got